Yo, welcome back to the Further Your Lifestyle podcast, conversations on lifestyle, passions, and hustles. My name's Chris, I am your host, and I'm super excited to be back here having the conversation with you. Episode 119 today, which actually, now that I think about it, this is actually pretty crazy because we're about to hit 120 episodes, a nice round number, and well, that will obviously be next week. So make sure you do subscribe, follow, and get connected with the podcast wherever you are listening, whether it's on the YouTube, whether it's on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, all those great places, because I wouldn't want you to miss out on episode 120 and the episodes to come from here. Now, if you've been following along for a while, you know that over the last probably about 6 weeks, I've been really pushing the conversation around making progress. And we're going to continue that conversation. And today I actually really want to get quite frank. Now, I do want to be mindful with this. And, I don't do these frank conversations to, pinpoint at anyone. And I don't want to have the intention of hurting anyone's feelings. Of course not. And I don't want to call anyone out. But I do want to make sure that I'm not beating around the bush. I do want to make sure that what I do talk about is helping rip off that band-aid. So if there is something there that you need to address, or if there is something there that you really need to deal with, that it's convicting you. That's the 100% honest truth of what I'm trying to achieve here. And I will also be fair in saying that, some of the conversations that I'm having here today, they're not necessarily always directed at you. They're sometimes just as much directed at myself. Actually, there's usually something that I'm taking away from this, because the way I go about actually pulling these podcasts together is, I do have a bit of a plan of the different things that I want to talk about, but most of the time, it's things that I'm dealing with, things that I'm trying to do to further my own lifestyle. Therefore, the best way to share to you guys how to further your own lifestyle is the stuff that I'm dealing with, how I'm doing it for myself. And these are, once again, little chips that I'm chipping away at that I want to share back and play back to you, my audience, my followers, and my listeners. So I appreciate you being here. And again, I just wanted to be very, very clear that I am going to get pretty frank, and it's up to you of how you take that. If there's something there that obviously sticks to you and resonates with you, that's got nothing to do with me being pushy or, attacking you. Clearly, there might be something there that you need to deal with, and that's why we're having the conversation. So today we are talking about getting the results that you want. And it's a common theme here on the podcast, as I mentioned before. And I will also say, I am just as in need to hear this conversation as much as you. And what's funny is I've written this script. I wrote this morning. I spent about 45 minutes actually prepping this and getting it right, because there is some information here where, or not information, more so context and insight that I wanted to make sure I'm bringing across that and play it in a way that's going to, be heard to the different people that are listening to this. Meaning we're all at different levels, we're all at different parts in our timeline of our journey, and we all need to hear something different because, we're stuck at different points in our life. So buckle up and let's dive in. So why don't you get the results that you want? Number one is you avoid discomfort and you seek shortcuts. 2, you have unhealthy relationships with perfectionism and the fear of failure. And 3rd is you have a fear of facing the unknown. Quite a lot of overlap between the 3, some very similarities between the 3, but each to their own, and they each bring a set of things that we need to unpack. And that's what we're unpacking. Now, I believe on the surface of what I've just said around, we avoid discomfort, or we seek shortcuts, or we have unhealthy relationships with perfectionism, or a fear of facing the unknown, we identify with this. We either identify it in the sense of that, yes, we know we struggle with this, or we deny it. Because one way or another, we are doing some of these things. I'm pretty sure I can guarantee you that there is something there that that you need to deal with. And either way, there is a conversation here. You're either going to be accepting to it, or you're going to, push away a little bit. But I challenge you to keep yourself honest. Be real, be open, have a listen to this and see if there is something here that you can take away and chew on and see if it can give you some good food for thought. So let's be real. When was the last time you avoided the obvious thing that you needed to be doing or to be done, and you looked for ways around it? Be honest. Now, I know procrastinating with side tasks to feel productive. We've spoken about this quite a lot in the last 3 months. So procrastinating with side tasks, or what I like to call them side quests, in order to make ourselves feel productive when we haven't actually even done the actual work that is going to enable us the results, or the progress, or the long-term productivity. You see, we do these things on the side because, in the moment they feel good. We have to get them done. They needed to be done, but they are irrelevant to what we actually need to be doing. And some good examples and some classic examples of this is sorting, cleaning, decluttering, instead of actually taking action to the points of what we need to be taking action on. We do excessive research without taking action. We get stuck in planning mode and we plan. We plan and we plan. I do this a lot, and we take no action. We try to get the visuals right. We get so focused on making something look pretty, making something look comfortable that people are going to accept it, when we're not actually focusing on putting any actual content out. This is a good example for dealing with YouTube or trying to build a brand. We consume how-to knowledge rather than doing something that's going to teach you, meaning we just listen, we just watch, but we don't actually get our hands dirty and go at it and experience it. We constantly start fresh or start over or try again from the beginning as a way to avoid getting into a deeper level of discomfort. It's easier to sometimes, let's not touch that because that's not going to work. That's a big obstacle. Let's start from fresh start, and we'll do it all again. We do it all the time. I've done it all the time, and I think you've done it before as well. So here's a good little I guess it's a fable, short story, anecdote, something you've probably heard before. But regardless, it's meant to be just a little short story to help give us some perspective of maybe how this can play into the parallels of our life. Let's say there is a woodcutter. This woodcutter needs to cut a large pile of logs or cuts down a tree or whatever it may be. But he realizes just before starting that his axe has become blunt. Now, if anyone has cut wood before, you know that, or even if you're cutting with a knife, that a knife or an axe that is not sharp, it's going to be a brutal experience trying to get the job done. Now, instead of actually taking the time to sharpen the axe, which, look, let's be fair, to actually go ahead and sharpen the axe, you're going to have to gather the right tools, find a sharpening stone, and you're going to need a lubricant to, actually, do the actual sharpening of the knife, or the axe in this case. You then need to inspect the blade. You need to revisit the blade. You need to assess if you need to sharpen in some more areas. Is the whole thing sharp? Do you need to keep doing it? You also need to secure the blade. You need to make sure it's in a right position so that you can get that angle to actually start sharpening it. You then must actually start sharpening, meaning you need to start the process of doing it. So getting the right angle, applying the right pressure, coming in from the right motion, or however it may be. I don't do this very often, and I think I've done it with my fishing knife once, but the idea is you're going to have to go through this process, rinse and repeat a few times to get it right. Then you need to test it. Is it enough? If not, then you need to repeat that said process. So that's going to take a little bit of time. So, and depending on how experienced you are, if you're a new woodcutter or if you've been doing this for yonks, it's going to take you a couple of minutes, or it might take you half an hour or more. So the option you have is you can either start chopping the logs immediately without sharpening your blade, or you can do it with a dull blade. And if you do it with a dull blade, most likely your progress is going to be slow. You're going to become exhausted, or the woodcutter becomes exhausted. Here I am talking about us. I've already changed it and blended it into a story about us and not even about the story of the woodcutter. But the whole premise here is essentially, because he doesn't do it, he starts to cut the wood and it becomes a very slow and hard effort kind of job. And he has little to show for his efforts after doing it for 30 minutes. If he had actually taken the time to sharpen the axe, he could have actually, gotten through and achieved his goal more efficiently, more effectively, and with less struggle and less work. He wouldn't have been as tired. And this is why it's very important that we invest our time wisely, that we invest our time and effort in preparation of, trying to avoid just taking these shortcuts to attain better outcomes. There is quick tricks and tips and things that we can do that do enable us to save time, but by bypassing the basics or the things that are going to be essential in actually getting the job done, that's cheating. It's like trying to cheat. You can't cheat the system. You have to follow the process. So, it's something to consider. And I've got a whole bunch of examples here that I went through. I created a list. I'm not going to talk through all of them. I'm going to give some examples. Baking a cake, right? You need to gather the ingredients. You need to follow a recipe accurately. And if you don't, well, then the cake's not going to rise properly. You're not going to be able to taste the cake the way it should have, or it's going to flop. It's not going to work out in its, potential form. Learning a musical instrument, you need to have regular practice sessions. You need to take lessons. You need to study theory. If you don't, well, then you're going to be lacking proficiency. You're not going to be able to, play the songs accurately. Maybe you can't play with other people. You're not going to be able to pick up the beat. These are just two examples, right? But I mean, think about like gardening, for instance. If you're not doing the soil preparation, if you're not doing the proper watering, if you're not doing the fertilizer, well, then these plants will become unhealthy. There'll be a poor yield and they'll become unfeasible to actually grow, and you'll have an unattractive garden. The same applies for building a business, getting fit, going to the gym, even developing leadership skills. When we learn leadership principles, as we seek feedback, as we actually go through and experience things for ourselves, we become an effective and better leader. Whereas if we don't do those things, if we don't put ourselves in the position to learn, to grow, and to take on these new principles, and to seek that 360 feedback, well, we'll become an ineffective leader. We'll find it difficult to actually guide and lead a team. We will miss out on opportunities for growth. It's that simple. Look, the list can go on. But the question I have for you before we move on to the next point is, how many times do you try and skip the work to get the results? I know I do it a lot. And this might actually mean you skip the work and then you get to where you are and you realize, okay, now I have to either go back and rework the progress, meaning you have to go back and do the work again because you've stuffed up to get the actual result that you need. We also become frustrated. We also become very unmotivated, and we can start to think that this is pointless because we're not seeing the results. But the reason why you're not seeing the results is because you're not doing the work that's needed, meaning you're avoiding the work that's needed to be done. We start to put the blame around, or we start putting things out there that, this doesn't work, this is impossible. We start to make excuses, and then we start to suspect that we are not good enough. All because we are too scared, we're too lazy, or we're being too stubborn to actually go address the obstacle in the room, or, go have a conversation with the obstacle in the room. Address the big elephant in the room. Obstacle, elephant, the same thing in this case. Sometimes we can't just keep trying to work around it. You need to go head on, and for you to get to where you need to be is you have to go over the mountain, through the mountain, under the mountain, dig a tunnel, whatever it may be. You need to go through that obstacle, and that is how you will then start to make that progress. Now that list goes on, but one thing I really want to say here quickly is when we really start to focus on just one thing that's going to enable the process, that will give us the know-how, that will give us the ability to actually execute, and we can start to progress with more ease and start to see the results. Let me say that again. I'll put it in a different perspective. If you're wanting to learn how to cook multiple dishes, right? You're probably better off learning to master one dish and becoming really well known for one dish, like whether it's omelette, whether it's salmon, fried salmon, or maybe you know how to make a good ramen bowl, or I don't know, whatever it may be. But if you're trying to take on and learn 75 dishes and you're trying to learn them in the same period you're trying to master one, you're not actually going to be able to get the results you need because you're multitasking, you're getting distracted, you're doing too many things, you're juggling, you've got side quests. Focus on getting the one thing right. Figure out what it is where you struggle. Figure out what it is that's holding you back. Figure out what is the obstacle ahead of you. Master that. Get over it. Defeat it. Conquer it. And then you can start to see the ease of results come through. Then you can pick up the next dish. Now, to top this off, the next thing we need to start to consider is, what about your unhealthy relationship with perfectionism and the fear of failure? How often do we spend excessive time on one thing, making it perfect? Now, I know I just said we should try and master one area, but this is a different perspective. What I'm trying to say is, like, we get so fixated, so held up on trying to make something perfect that we actually then forget about the other things that need to occur, the other things that need to happen. A good example of this is in study and exams. When you go for an exam, you might have 40 questions. You've got 2 hours. You know, do you spend all your time on the big question that's worth 10 points and miss out on all the other 39 questions that maybe are worth 1 point? You're better off doing each of those other points and then leaving the 10 for later, because if you can get 39 questions right and you get, roughly 30 points or whatever, and, you go do the final one, which is worth 10 points, and you don't actually get it right, well, it's okay. Whereas if you only did the one that's worth 10 points, but you didn't do the other 39 that are worth, 30 points, you're actually going to be worse off. Does that make sense? So this is a very common trait that happens in the everyday life. The other thing is avoiding the opportunities that will bring us the results. But because since we have the fear of actually making a mistake, we skip it. A good example of this is public speaking. Let's say you want to be a master speaker, you want to be a Toastmaster, you want to get out there and you want to tell the world about everything, or you want to have a YouTube account and start a YouTube, but you're scared of public speaking. You feel uncomfortable in front of the camera. Well, what is the best way to get better at public speaking or speaking in front of the camera? Is by public speaking or speaking in front of the camera. That is the best way to overcome it, to become comfortable, become confident, and be able to talk. You go listen to my first episode of the Further Your Lifestyle podcast, and you will hear the difference in my voice and the confidence and the way that I talk and the way that I present myself and the way that we have these conversations. I was scared, I was nervous, I was terrified. But the only way to be able to get through that was to do more of it. I had to break through the ice. That's the only way. And this is one thing that we struggle to do. This is also similar for creative pursuits as well, like drawing or artwork or creating content, like YouTube, for instance, or writing a blog. The other thing we tend to do when it comes to this area is we bury emotions, or we bury the deep conversations with loved ones. We push them aside and we avoid having them because we're scared, or we have this fear or this idea that we're going to be rejected, we're going to have to get vulnerable. And when really, ironically, if we actually have those conversations, we're more actually likely to become deeper in those conversations, deeper in those connections, and deeper in those relationships if we open up with that said person. But we don't. We're too fearful of the rejection and the vulnerability. The other thing is we want results with actually doing any of the work. And again, it comes back to the fear of failure. We want to do all these things. We have these ideas. We want to be promoted to manager, but we don't want to work as a manager. Or we want to be, before I go for the promotion, I want to do this right first. Or I want to make sure I've nailed this. Or before I submit it, I want to make sure this is good. Or before I send in my CV, I need to make sure I've covered all my bases. We make all these excuses that it's not good enough. When you'll probably find that good enough is, probably 2 hours ago that you've been spending the last 2 hours trying to master something which doesn't actually add any value. Sometimes another example of this is sometimes, we want to be a leader of a team, but we don't want to deal with the people or coordinate with people. You can't have your cake and eat it too. This is a brilliant saying. I love this saying. My boss always used to say it back at when I was working the 9 to 5 is you want to keep your cake and eat it too. You don't get to have both. Perfectionism is, you build a beautiful cake. It looks amazing. It looks perfect. But then you don't want to eat it. You don't want to get rid of it. You want to keep it forever. Well, you can't do that. You either eat the cake or you don't, but you can't get to enjoy the cake then. You only get to enjoy it physically, like looking at it. You don't get to keep your cake and eat it too. You got to pick which one. A couple of other points I'll add here is we don't want to try new things because we're scared that we won't be good at them. Or we don't have an immediate impressive skill that we can apply to it. How annoying is it? How frustrating is it that if you've got a sibling or you've got a good friend that you both go do something, you've never had any experience doing it, you flop and he flies or she flies and they do really, really well with it. And they've just naturally become really good at bowling or really good at mini golf or they pull really good Pokemon cards or whatever it may be. How frustrating is it? But that doesn't mean we don't put ourselves out there because we are capable of things. We are good at stuff. Sometimes we just got to figure out what that is. Now, this next one, I do this a lot. I do this way too much, is overanalyze decisions. Spending excessive time understanding, planning for the future, and planning to avoid, making making any mistakes. And we plan in the fear of making a bad decision. Now, it's good to have a thought out approach. It's good to have a strategy. It's good to have a plan. It's good to understand what you're getting into. But there is a line. Now, this one, look, I kind of got over this as I got older and as you start to become and figure out who you are, or when you start to appreciate yourself. But this one is trying to look flawless in a physical appearance, but it only leads to low self-esteem. We can do so much work to look good, to feel good, to think that we are looking good, when it actually might not do the right thing, or it might not actually do the expectation you're expecting. And then when we don't get the results, it just lowers our self-esteem even more. So as you can hear, all these things hinder our ability to actually get the results, all because we are trying to make things perfect. We are trying to get things right because we're too scared that we might fail if we don't. Well, look, that's not actually the truth. It is important to embrace a growth mindset, to be changing, to be adapting, to be trying to do other things. But it's also important that we accept imperfections as part of the learning process. If you don't know something, that's okay. How do we go about learning how to know that? How do we acquire the knowledge? And focus on actually progressing rather than this perfection or having all the information before you even go ahead and execute. A lot of the time, we need to learn along the way. There's a great quote from Richard Branson. He says, if a great opportunity comes along and you don't know how to solve it, say yes and then figure it out later. Look, I'm not saying go take some wild risks, but sometimes we need to put the fluff down and actually just get on with it. Now, this leads me to my final point, which is really the overlap of all of these anyway in the prior conversations of, what we've just discussed. And this one is the fear of facing the unknown. Now, I'm going to talk a bit about my own experience here. Now, if you're listening to this, you can put your hand up, or you can just, nod, or you can say it to yourself. But essentially, we all have ideas of things that we want. Now, for me personally, running, building a business, and my podcast, they're 3 priorities. When it comes to running, I wanted to run a 5K, then a 10K, then a half marathon, a marathon. I'm working on my second 50K now, and then eventually I want to do 100 kilometers as well. In my business, I wanted to build a business. I wanted to hit my business with $100,000 in revenue. I then want to do $250,000 in revenue, then $500,000, then $1 million in revenue. I've got all these milestones. The same with the podcast. I want to have a podcast. I want to have a 10,000 download podcast. I want to have a sponsored podcast. I want to have a chartered podcast. All these goals, ambitions. I know what I want. These are all things that I want. Some I have achieved, but some I still have a very long way to go. Now, running my first 1 kilometer, I remember doing that, and that was hard work. And I didn't really care about anything else. If I was running and walking, that was okay. But I got to the point where, it wasn't much of a challenge anymore. So it meant I had to step it up. And the next thing was jumping onto a 3K, which, that was pretty scary. But eventually I got comfortable with a 3K. And I remember then planning out, I'm going to have to plan and train for a 5K. Which it makes me think, what? Are you serious? Like, why? But back then, I had no idea. I mean, they have couch to 5K plans because people don't know how to do this. And that's okay. I didn't know how to do it. But I was scared of going to do that 5K because I'm like, what if I have to walk? What if it's harder than I expect? What if I don't hit the timer that I want? These are all things that we have to go through. And I did it. I got it done. I finished it. And then it wasn't long after that I wanted to do my 10K. And that was the next logical plan. And it's still crazy to think that I used to train weeks on weeks to do a 10K. Whereas now I'm probably doing a 10K almost every couple of days. So that's part of the journey. As we progress, we get momentum, we get to a new level, and things become easier that were harder. And we're able to leverage that. We're able to take that under our belt, and it's an acquired skill. It's an acquired talent. It's the ability to execute as we need, when we need. But now, years later, I do, on average, 1 to 2 half marathons a month. I've done a 50K, and now I'm training for my second 50K. However, this is where it gets interesting. I want to do a 100K run one day. I want to do it. But that's still a little bit way off for now. And we have to consider that I've only done up to 50K. I've got training, I've got experience, I've got knowledge. But that knowledge, that experience is not going to get me to the front door of doing 100K. I'm going to have to do something different. And you can't just expect, oh yeah, I'll just do double the 50K training and that will get me to 100K. It doesn't work like that. You have to train a whole different way. You have to approach it in a whole different way. It's a whole different process. I'm going to have to enable myself, allow myself to learn how to train for 100 kilometer, not how to train for 50 kilometers times 2. The point is, there will be a level of unknown regardless of where you are in life. Even though you've got plenty of knowledge, even though you've acquired skills, understanding, knowledge, and experience, you're still going to have to embrace what you do not know. That's as simple as that. This is going to come in all forms. As you travel to a new country, maybe when you go on a holiday, you start a new job or a career, you make a significant life change, you want to try a new hobby or an activity or new technological advancements. ChatGPT, AI is coming. That's scary stuff. Maybe you want to do a new activity or a new hobby, or I think I said that one before. Maybe you want to make a new financial investment. Maybe you want to take on a personal risk. Maybe you want to explore different beliefs. Maybe challenge your personal beliefs and values. Maybe you want to start a business. Maybe you want to start a YouTube channel. Maybe you are facing some health issues and you need to go get some checkups, but that's still scary too. It is essential that we cultivate curiosity, embrace uncertainty as a natural part of our lives, as just the everyday thing. And as we do this, we will develop a mindset of exploration and adaptability. And when we can start to adapt on everything that's going on around us, it doesn't make it so overwhelming to learn, to grow, and to become something better of ourselves. If I recap, what got me to the 50K in running, training, planning, exercise, experience, That's not going to get me to 100 kilometers. What got me to $100,000 in revenue in my reselling business will not get me to $1 million in the same period. It might get me to $1 million over a long period of time, but it's not going to get me there quicker. My first $100,000 of revenue took me 579 days. My second $100,000 of revenue took me 296 days. See the difference? And that's because I was able to take the lessons. I was able to change things up. I had momentum. I had understanding. I had acquired knowledge. And it meant I could embrace the challenges ahead. I could adapt. I could tackle them head on. And I could try the new things and embrace the unknown and get results that I wanted. In our journey towards progress, we have the power to overcome obstacles. Actually, we need to be doing that regardless. But as we do this, we need to be doing it via or while embracing discomfort. We're going to have to get uncomfortable with being uncomfortable, releasing the grip of perfectionism or letting go of fear, and then fearlessly venturing into the unknown. And I'm not saying, you need to turn off all your lights and start walking around in darkness. That's not what I'm saying. Start to move towards things that you want and start to, challenge yourself a little bit more of how you're going to do that. Put your feelers out. Speak to someone. Ask for an opportunity. Have a conversation. Sit somewhere different. Reach out to someone. Send that email. Request for an interview. Whatever it may be. You need to start to push the little stepping stones ahead of you. You are the obstacle between you and the results that you want. It's that simple. You need to get over yourself. Talking to myself here. You need to get to know yourself. You need to understand what it is that you need to do. Take yourself to new places, new levels, and new encounters. If you want that, you need to take yourself to new places, new levels, and new encounters. But that means you need to let go of other things, and it also means you need to be willing to adapt, be uncomfortable. But the big thing that I will say this, and regardless of all the insight that I've just shared, is you need to be happy. Are you happy? Now, I'm not saying to go do this, go do that, and you'll be happy. I'm not saying that because I don't know what will make you happy. But what I will say is go and do things that make you happy, that brings happiness, that enables happiness. If you are happy where you are now, then great. But my question to you on that is, are you going to be happy where you are now if you're doing the same thing in 2 years' time or in 1 year's time or in 10 years' time? If the answer is no, if you won't be happy, then you need to start working on what that happiness will look like in that time frame. I know what I want in 2 years, 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, etc. If I want those results, if I want that happiness point, if I want to be able to live that life and, do what I dream to do, it's not going to just happen if I don't do anything. Opportunities may knock, but again, I still need to be putting myself out there, making myself readily available, and making myself willing to adjust to, not doing the perfectionism, but also embracing the unknown. Again, we can only have these things that we want. We can see where they are. We know that they're attainable, but we can only have them if we create the opportunity for those things to happen. I have to do the work. You have to do the work in order to make the progress, to get the results that you want. It is that simple. And that is the blunt conversation that I wanted to have. It's a bit of a record on repeat, but the reality is, if you're new here, you've probably never heard this before. And if you're not new here, maybe you're hearing a snippet of this. Or maybe you listen to it every week. Well, I'm here to tell you, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? Where do you want to be in 6 months, 1 year? Are you happy now? If you're happy now, that's great. I'm happy for you. But will you be happy doing this if you continue to do this for the next 1 year? Will you be happy if you don't see any change? Will you be happy if nothing changes in the sense of moving you towards closer to these ambitions and goals? You need to start getting the momentum happening. Start not kicking the bucket down the line and avoiding what needs to happen, but start getting into the bucket. Start filling the bucket up with water, carrying it around and doing the work that needs to happen. Otherwise, don't complain. Don't get all, and again, I'm not trying to be rude, but don't get all sooky or la if you don't see the results that you want. When we see the results that we didn't want, we need to reflect on what went wrong. What did I do? How did this happen? We are responsible and accountable for our actions, therefore also the results that we receive. So keep that in mind. Look, really do appreciate you being here. Great conversation. Really, really good. I would rather if we were having two-way conversation, and I am working on getting more guests back. But if you do want to interact with me, ask a question, have a conversation, you can jump over to speakpipe.com/furtheryourlifestyle, where you can leave a voicemail, you can leave a message, and we can have a conversation. I will integrate it into one of these episodes and I will answer that question. If you think someone can resonate from this podcast, from this episode, share it. Send it to someone, send it to a friend, a family member, chuck it up on your Facebook, wherever it may be. That goes a long way in helping the podcast. Even a like, a subscribe, a comment, all those things really, really do help. So if you can do that, takes a couple of minutes, it would mean the absolute world to me. Really do appreciate being here. You have a wonderful day. Cheers.